At this time, we're going to begin the funeral services here in our chapel for Mr. Mark Jacobs. As we begin the service, I would ask if any of you may have a cell phone or any other noise-making device, please turn them off at this time. Officiating the service here today is Rabbi Shlomo Kramer.
Mizmor LeDavid, Adonai mi agur be'alecha, mi yishkon behar kodshecha. A song of David. O Lord, who may sojourn in your tent, who may dwell on your holy mountain. Holech tamim u'foel tzedek v'dover emes bilvavo. One who walks in purity, does what is righteous, and speaks the truth from their heart. Who casts no slander on his tongue, nor does harm to his fellow man. One who honors those who are in awe of God, who would swear truthfully even to their own personal hurt, but never retract. Won't lend money on interest nor take a bribe against the innocent. One who does these things shall never falter. I didn't know Mark. I learned a lot about Mark over the past 24 hours, and I want to share with you, first and foremost, some words of his brother. These aren't my words, these are yours. Mark was just not my brother. He was my twin brother. Being twins, we were mistaken for each other all the time. My mom, Faye, always said the only way she could tell us apart was when we were babies, by a birthmark one of us had. Yet she admitted she didn't always remember which one of us had the birthmark. Mark and I were alike in so many ways, besides just our good looks. We both despised being in Little League. We both got in trouble at summer camp and were sent home. We both struggled with Hebrew school, but it did end well when we finally were bar mitzvahed. Mark and I were always in separate classes in school, but we were both involved in student government and the current events club. We were both passionate about politics, thankfully with the same point of view. Mark and I shared a love of music, going to concerts together. Mark would make cassette tapes of new songs he wanted me to hear. He was quite grateful of when I gave him a Lou Reed CD that he never had. We also both shared a love of art and collecting, not quite to the point of hoarding. We had similar collections of books, vintage toys, and record albums. We would spend Saturday afternoons at the flea market looking for pieces to add to our collection. I am so proud and sometimes jealous of Mark's talents. He had a great photography career. He caught the photography bug in junior high. In high school, Mark was head photographer of the school newspaper and editor of the yearbook. He ran for student government with a slogan, "In the dark, vote for Mark." Mark was awarded first place in Illinois Press Photography Photo Contest for his photography portfolio. He went on to open his own camera store and publish the successful photography books. Mark's collection of autochromes have been on exhibit in prestigious gallery shows. Mark went back to college after many years in the camera business to get his master's degree. He then taught political science and philosophy after getting his degree. Mark deeply loved and was so proud of Susan and Hannah. He was always eager to share a picture of them with Donna and me. He would always mail us prints, and more recently also sharing pictures with us online. This is a small sampling of the memories I have of my brother Mark. I will miss him deeply and love him forever. And Janice writes as follows: My brother Mark, whom I dearly love, is gone and is such a shock. I'm so glad I was able to see him last month one last time. I will miss him. May he rest in peace. Mark was soft-spoken verbally, but spoke loudly with his passion for art and photography. He was very talented, an intellectual, but he was humble and didn't seek to be praised. He did what he loved and was extremely good at it. Mark was a loving brother, father, and husband. He was kind, devoted, and thoughtful. He raised Hannah to be the terrific woman she has become. I'm so grateful that he was able to see his newborn grandson. He'll be sorely missed, not only by his family, but all that he befriended over the years. I'm certain Mark has joined Faye, Ben, and Sharon in eternal happiness, and together they will watch over all of us. I love you, Mark, and I always will. Thank you. I'd like to ask Hannah to come say a few words about her dad.
First of all, thank you guys for being here. This is not something I thought we'd be doing for many, many, many years. As some of you know, and many of you know, my dad was born here in Skokie, and he knew Skokie, better than anybody. 70 years later, he could tell you exactly what building was exactly where and everything that went through it. And that's just exactly who he was. He had so much intellect, knowledge, and he could share literally anything about anything. One of my cousins reached out that one of his first memories of my dad was at one of those trivia games, and my dad just knew every single answer. And it's honestly one of the things that I really am going to miss the most about him is, as many of you have relationships with my dad online, especially those who are here with us remotely. He had friends all over the world, including myself, and we would chat over Facebook Messenger, pretty much, every day, every other day, he would send me what was going on in the world, or I would, and we would, at questions, just listen to him and what he had to say, and there was so much. Now I was interested. Obviously, as a kid, I was a little bit more angsty about it, but my dad really taught me everything. He loved my mom so much. She, he drove her, it drove me everywhere, literally everywhere. Now Adriel and I are forced to get our license because we just hadn't gotten it. We didn't need it. Every time we came here, he drove us literally everywhere, at high school to parties, He didn't do the 4 a.m. He made sure I figured that one out myself, but he knew that I was going to parties though, and because he was that kind of dad that was, you could be open, you could be honest. He wasn't judgmental, and he truly cared, and he truly saw the good in people. And my mom, which is where that all started, he loved her, he was fiercely devoted to her, to me. We were his entire world. He has this Autochrome collection, which many of you have only heard for the first time in the last, 72 hours or so, but that was his passion. That was his life. His entire photography history of being flown, to New York, to meeting Andy Warhol, to knowing, members of the Velvet Underground, and that whole life that he was honestly not even fascinated by. He thought Andy Warhol's parties were boring and lame, and everyone was just on drugs and didn't get it. So, my dad was too cool for Andy Warhol, basically. But I didn't know that guy. That was all before I was born, And since I was born, the collection remained, something that was, going to be, what is our future, essentially. But I never understood it as deeply as he did. And I wish I listened more, when he tried to share it with me. And he got to share it with some of my friends. He really cared about my friends. And, You know, he would always ask about them, even like childhood friends that, you know, he'd want updates on. And he really just, he tried to stay connected and in touch, and he loved his family no matter, you know, they were, you know, in touch, not in touch. And it's just, you know, it was who he is. And, you know, it's the one side that many people didn't see of him was like his little humor. He like didn't show it too often, but one thing, you know, he had humor, and I was talking to Matt about his outdoorsiness, and, you know, he would feed the turkeys and feed the woodchucks and tell me that I was, you know, part of a woodchuck family, and I had paws and was born with a tail, and would say things to me like when I was growing up. And, you know, even until, you know, a few years ago when I and Adriel would still sleep in later than him, that when I woke up, the baby's awake, the baby's awake. And it was such a joy this last trip that we were here 2 weeks ago, you know, seeing my dad do that with Azaria. Every time you'd wake up, and even Adriel's already started. So my dad's, you know, really continued to pass that down. And, you know, there's so many random sides to my dad. I don't know if you guys know, he had a Twitter following of like nearly 3,000 people, and he was really proud he got kicked off Twitter once. And the only thing that was disappointing was he lost about 2,000 followers, so he actually had more than just about 3,000. But his Twitter was just, it was, you know, it was Israel activism, it was just, you know, what's going on in the Jewish world. He was so up to date. You know, he knew what was going on in Israel faster than we even did. You know, something like I would see an ambulance go by, and my dad would be like, "Oh yeah, there was a terrorist attack here, blah blah blah," and I'm like, "Oh, okay, I live here. You know that faster than me." Or I was in Harnof during a terrorist attack that had happened a block away, a city a neighborhood in Jerusalem. And at the time, it was very difficult for a lot of people. And I was asked by somebody like, "How are you okay?" And I'm like, my dad taught me this is what, you know, this is what it means to be a Jew, you know, like this can happen anywhere. And, you know, we heard the news. I mean, if yesterday what happened, and thank God that, you know, the hostages had been released in the synagogue in Texas, and if, you know, if my dad was here, he would be continuously updating me throughout and telling me all of his opinions about it and exactly what should happen and et cetera, you know, and like he was on it, and he was on top of it, and he was truly a really great guy that, you know, he wasn't like the most outgoing person in the world, but those who were privileged enough to get to know him, I mean, everybody I reached out to, and, you know, I still don't even know how to get in touch with all of his friends, but, you know, shocked, saddened, surprised, but mostly amazed just by who he was as a person, his intellect, his knowledge, his, you know, one time after my dad had already gotten rid of hundreds of books in his basement, as those who've been to my house can imagine, Adriel and I walked down there, and Adriel's like, "All right, like, you've read all these books?" And my dad's like, "Well, yeah, of course, like, that's a really dumb question, Adriel," in very typical, you know, my dad fashion, but, and Adriel's like, "What, really?" And he's like, "Okay, fine, so this book." And it's like, da-da-da-da-da-da, everything in it. This book, da-da-da-da, everything that's in it. Da-da-da-da, everything that's in it. And he could just go on, and it was all in his head. Like, I never saw him read a book, you know? Like, I don't know when this happened. I mean, once, you know, like, internet came out, he was online, and he was, you know, but, like, he read these books sometime before I was born and still had the knowledge. I can't remember what I, like, did this morning. I couldn't even remember the bottles to, like, bring here, you know? Like, but he had it, and he knew, just like he knew all the buildings in Skokie, he remembered every single friend he had growing up, every single thing he did for each person. And, you know, he had his everything until, you know, the end. He didn't know. I'm told he went peacefully in his sleep. You know, he didn't know. We were, thankfully, you know, in America, our flight had been canceled. Thank God. Did not think that at the time. It was really, really stressful, but I am so thankful I had that extra time with my dad. And I know he is proud of me, proud of his grandson, proud of his son-in-law, loves his siblings, loves his nephews, love his grandnephews, and, and all of my friends, all of his cousins, and, but he's with Susan, who we love dearly. He's with Bubby, Papa, Ben, and Faye, and still here because I'm here, and I am who I am because of him. Yeah, and just love him. I just love him, and he was a really, really good dad. He was a good dad, and I didn't always appreciate it, but I do now, that's for sure. And he knew that. Since I stopped being 13, I think I figured that out. But he taught me everything, and yeah, thank you guys.
Hannah, that was beautiful. I don't know if anyone else could tell, aside from myself, but Hannah didn't have one note as she spoke about her father. That was. Honestly,
talking about my dad is the easiest thing because he had so much to share. So much to share.
Beautiful. I'd like to call upon Matt.
Mark was my uncle. I believe Mark was 22 when I was born. So I had the great privilege and we had a very close family, of seeing the different Marks of the phases of his life and his accomplishments. Growing up, I lived in sort of Central Rogers Park. He was a Toohey and Western. He often babysat me. And our life consisted of me going to Bubby and Papa's over here on Laurel. Papa would take me to the camera shop. I'd spend time there, and then we'd go have breakfast at Wags, Walgreens' little shop that they had. As I got older, I never really appreciated the absolute mastery of photography that Mark had, to be a published author, to run the shop, to take his own photos, to collect others. And Mark's the kind of guy that he hit that point, and it's about when I was in high school, he decided to go a different route. And he became an absolute master of political science, Middle Eastern political philosophy, theory, Jewish culture, Jewish history. And he had the deepest intellect of any man I've ever known. He studied these subjects, he analyzed them, he synthesized them, and he could teach it to you. He could take very complex theories concerning our people, our culture, and our history, and relate it to what's going on now. Again, I don't think I realized till I got out in the world and got a little bit older how special he really was. But despite all his accomplishments as a professor, as a photographer, the one consistent that never changed with Mark was his family. He was a family man through and through. We were very close. I saw Mark a few times a week my entire life up until the time he moved to Madison. And even then we would go up there. I remember going with Bubby and Papa and feeding the squirrels out in the backyard. He was always there for his siblings. He was always there for me as a nephew. I still remember my 5th birthday, I got the Encyclopedia Britannica, a big red set with the 30 books. He would always inspire me, his gifts, the things we would do together, museums, the 57th Street bookstore in Hyde Park, all of the activities, and we did many, I realize now involved learning and exploring and enjoying, whether it was science or art or other things. But again, that consistency was, he was always there for his siblings. My mom went through a bad divorce in the 80s, and Mark was there. And it was Mark that took her to the Snuggery for a Jewish singles event, where she then met her husband of 36 years. And unfortunately, they both passed last year. But Mark, again, was there. He was there for my mom at Michael's passing, and he was there to see his sister pass. Of all the joys and things that gave Mark pleasure, though, his wife, his daughter, and his new grandson. Nothing made him so proud of his many accomplishments than knowing that he had a child and now a grandchild and a son-in-law, and that they had a happy family living the Jewish life that he had always studied and promoted and championed. This is a sad, terrible day. I have a very long list of things that I'd planned to talk with Mark, to explore with Mark, so many other gifts that I had anticipated him giving me with his knowledge, and that simply wasn't to be. But I'm grateful for the 48 years I have had him in my life, and having Hannah and our family. Thank you. Thank you for coming today.
Must be in the genes, because Matt spoke without any notes either.
It's all because of him, honestly.
That's what it appears. I believe Bob, who's a friend I'm not sure where he lives, in the East Coast, I think?
New York, Buffalo, I believe.
Buffalo. He's going to be speaking to us virtually, and they told me that it will take 10 seconds for him to come up. So I hope he's coming up soon.
Hi, I'm Bob Hirsch. I'm talking to you from Grand Island, New York, which is just outside of Buffalo. And I've known Mark for the past 20 years. Thanks to the internet, that was how we initially became acquainted. And it started out as a professional relationship that became very personal. When I first encountered Mark, it was on an online photography forum. And at the time, I was working on a book about color photography. And I knew that Mark was an expert and had an autochrome collection. And this was an area that I was definitely not an expert in. And so I reached out to Mark, and he was incredibly generous. And even though we had never met and were, just online acquaintances, he packed up and sent me a box of autochromes and support materials for, my research. And I was very impressed that he would, just do such a thing. I mean, that, to a stranger, because these are, valuable, irreplaceable, unique items. And what this kind of led into then was I found out about the kind of depth and knowledge that he had about not only the autochromes, but also photographic history. So from his generosity, I got to know Mark more online, and we started emailing one another. And as I got to know Mark through the emails, I really became impressed with his analytical abilities. And I was also impressed with his historic and contemporary knowledge about world history and Judaic history. And this kind of, led to a further developing and the deepening of our relationship. And this eventually led me to ask Mark to become like a reader and an editor for a number of my books, for essays that I wrote, for presentations that I gave. And I really valued what he had to say to me. And he always, with his critiques, made whatever I was working on stronger. And he had a way of helping me, cut through the underbrush and stay on the path. And as we got to know each other more, what we had originally started doing professionally then kind of led us into more our interest in contemporary events. And over time, I would say Mark and I kind of became like the classic stereotypical Jewish debaters, going back and forth, arguing with one another about various events that were happening in the world. And even though Mark and I often did not agree on issues, the thing that always impressed me was how, at the end of the day, we were still able to respect each other. And I think that when I look around at what's happening in the world today, I mean, this seems like a real gift and something that the world is really lacking in. And so, you know, this was something really valuable that, I mean, that we could kind of, you know, go at it in the afternoon and have these, fist pounding disagreements. And then at the end of the day, you'd go, well, you know, how you doing? You know, what are you doing for dinner tonight? How's Hannah? Blah, blah, you know, that, we still could relate to each other as human beings. And one of the things that Mark really helped me in, I mean, was his knowledge about Judaica. And one of the things that we both became involved in, was, pushing back against anti-Semitism online. And we both, this one thing we could agree on was the necessity of Zionism and how history, really makes it clear why the existence of Israel as a Jewish state is a necessity. So over time, our relationship just became more and more personal, and that's how I learned about Susan and how I learned about Hannah. And we were eventually able to spend time together in person in various locations at photo gatherings. And I was really impressed when I met Hannah with my wife, Adele, the first time we were in Jerusalem. And Hannah spent the entire day touring us around and was just so generous and so kind to us. And it really made an impression on both Adele and I. And we, thought that Hannah was a fabulous person, and that also that speaks well to the job that Mark did as a dad that Hannah summed up so well. And I think that Hannah's introduction helped us to kind of get our footing in Israel, and actually became kind of, I think, one of the basis for a series of future trips that we've made to Israel since then. So kind of to sum up, I really already miss Mark, and I miss the back and forth that we engaged in on a daily basis. And, it's something that we've shared for many, many years, and something that I found both aggravating and fulfilling at the same time. And, I really feel the loss of his presence. And I can't imagine how that ever is going to be replaced, because I think our friendship was something that we were able to cultivate that overcame the distance, the time, and different points of view. And I think that says just a lot about the kind of person that Mark was. Thank you.
Hannah, you said to me something last night when I called you. Garfinkel asked me to help out today, and I want to agree and disagree with something that you said. You told me two things. You said to me that I said, "Tell me about your dad," and you said to me two lines. You said to me, He was not Torah observant, but he was fiery religious. I'm not sure those two ideas could go together. So which is it? We know that the Almighty gave us many commandments. Some are commandments, what's referred to as between man and God. Things that God wants us to do to serve him. And then there are commandments between man and man. Those refer to what we do for others. To be a religious person, to be a fiery religious person, you have to love your neighbor. You have to care about your parents. You have to be kind. You have to look out for those around you. You have to know how to disagree with love. I actually loved, I can't see you, Bob, but you could see me, what you said about we disagreed on everything, but we loved each other. That's what it means to disagree, to love each other, to fight for your truth. Our rabbis teach us that we have many commandments, but even in the 10 Commandments, that the 10 Commandments are split between those where God tells us to believe in God, to honor the Sabbath, to not to murder, to respect your parents, not to be jealous of others. To be a fiery religious person means that you are Torah observant. In our prayers, it's interesting that none of our prayers are spoken in the individual language. We don't ask God for my wealth or my health. That's not what we ask God for. Everything is spoken in the plural. We ask God for we. We think of the whole. We think of the Jewish people as a whole, the world as a whole. That's our ultimate prayer, is Melech al kol haaretz, that Hashem should be king over the entire world. Mark's passion for Eretz Yisrael, for Israel, and his love of Israel was not an individual, just about him. It was about what we'll call in Hebrew the klalius, about the klal, about the tzibur, about thinking about the next person. Believer in Jewish history, he knew the Beis HaMikdash stood. Those were your words, Hannah. He saw the good in people. He took care of his wife even when it was difficult. Sometimes when it's not difficult, we go the easy route. We're praised. But to look at a person who took care of someone else when it was difficult, that's a fiery religious person. Who took pride in you, Hannah, for making Aliyah, for choosing the lifestyle you've chosen. How proud he was of you, how proud he was of your grandson, and how the Almighty arranged that you, after not seeing him for a while, being in Israel, that you were able to see him only a few weeks ago, and he is able to hold Azariah in his hands. He told me as well that your father didn't believe in something which he called the half-Jew. Shema Yisrael were words that were on his lips. He was born a Jew, he lived a Jew, he loved the Jewish people, he loved his friends. He was a fiery religious person, and that's how he should always be remembered. Moshe ben Reuven Yelech l'Shalom, may he go in peace. Yanuach b'Shalom, may he rest in peace. Utehei nishmato tzura b'tzora chayim, and may his soul be bound in the bond of eternal life. Please rise for the Kel Malei Rachamim. Elim Malei Rachamim, shochein bamromim, Hamtzei menucha nechona al kanfei hashchina, b'malos kedoshim utehorim, kizara kiyam azirim. Es nishmas Moshe ben Reuven shalach li olamo, bavur shanachnu mispadalim bad askaras nishmaso, b'gan Eden tehei menuchaso. Lachein bal harachamim, yasti reyu b'seiser knafav liolamim, v'yitzrar b'tzar achayim es nishmaso, Adonai hu nachalaso, v'yanuach b'shalom al mishkavo, v'nomar amen. O God, full of compassion, who dwells on high, grant proper repose in the sheltering wings of your presence. The lofty levels of the holy and pure shine as the brightness of the firmament, onto the soul of Moshe, the son of Reuven, who has gone to his world, and for whose memory we pray. May his repose be in paradise, and the Master of compassion bring him under the cover of God's wings and bind his soul in the bond of life. May the Lord be his heritage, and may he repose on his resting place in peace. And let us respond, Amen.
This concludes the service here in our chapel. The interment will take place immediately at the family's plots at Shalom Memorial Park Cemetery, 1700 West Road, Rand Road in Arlington Heights. Following the interment today, the family will be receiving calls of condolence today at the Mattins residence, 6721 North Francisco, until 6:30 p.m. today. That information's on the inside of the funeral service folder for those of you that attended today. For those going in procession with the family, the procession will be forming in our parking lot. Now, please make sure you obtain an orange funeral safety sticker. That sticker should be placed in the front passenger side of your windshield. We would also ask that you please have your bright headlights and flashing hazard lights on at all times. For an additional measure of safety, our staff will be putting magnetic flags on the tops of the vehicles. As we drive in procession today, please drive as close as safety permits to the vehicle in front of you at all times. We want to avoid having any large spaces or large gaps in the procession, particularly as we pass through the intersections. I want everyone to please take note, those that are in attendance and those online. The family has asked that memorials in Mr. Jacobs' name be made to Project 613. That information is printed on the funeral service folders. For those of you watching online, the information is available on the website that you are currently on. The following individuals have been selected to act as pallbearers. As I call your name, if you'd please come to the front of the chapel. Adriel Ben, Greg Jacobs, Matthew Savage, and Scott Savage. If I could ask everyone to please rise as Mr. Jacobs and his family and the rabbi are escorted from the chapel. Thank you.